Hour, but I want to continue the conversation about the importance of this and the potential importance of this with retired General Wesley Clark. He's the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and also a former presidential advisor, and CNN contributor David Gergen. David, I want to go to you first because if you're the President of the United States, the Libyan regime can make this argument. We can laugh at the offer. We can say it is unacceptable. We can say it leaves a Gaddafi in power, and it doesn't even get Colonel Gaddafi out of power immediately, so it's unacceptable. However, they can also say to the international community, we are putting a diplomatic proposal on the table. Maybe you won't take it as is, but why don't we have a conversation, and why don't you stop those airstrikes?
Well, John, I think the very fact that Gaddafi appears ready to step down, it's doubtful his sons would put forward this proposal unless they had some agreement for them with the father, because he's such a strong figure in their lives, that he would be willing to go along with this. From a Washington point of view, that's obviously progress. It doesn't solve the problem, but it begins to give you something. I think the thing to watch also is what the response is from the Arab world in particular, but perhaps from other nations that are part of this coalition. If there is a serious offer on the table for some sort of ceasefire and a change, will some of the Arab nations say, well, let's call off the airstrikes. Let's not keep up all this military pounding, and let's see if we can work this out. I'm not sure if that will happen, but it sure be something you'd want to watch in Washington.
An excellent point by David Gergen. And General Clark, you know, you're the military commander of NATO and you're the Supreme Allied Commander, but you know from your time in the job, you're also a politician. You've got to keep a coalition together, and if one member of NATO objects, that can throw the whole thing off the rails. To David's point, this is not, from what we know of it, a serious, acceptable proposal by any means. But it is a diplomatic proposal. You do have the Qatari Air Force and part of the no-fly zone. You do have a lot of members of NATO who have been skittish about this. The Turks saying we'll only do humanitarian aid. Is this something, even if it is a bluff, even if it is a propaganda tool, that could throw the coalition off the tracks?
Well, you would expect that Gaddafi would have a three-pronged strategy. Number one, he'd be trying to take apart the opposition. He would do it by military force, by bribes, by threats against their families, by his intelligence services abroad, by any means he could do. Number two, he'd be trying to strengthen his own forces by bringing in more mercenaries and supplies through the south. And number three, he'd be buying time through diplomacy. Now, we have to have an equally subtle and effective multi-pronged strategy. And I think the end is inevitable. He's not going to succeed in destroying the opposition, I don't think. I don't think he's going to be able to break through the increasing isolation. And so he's going to be pinned in this diplomatic process.
And so if you're the general, and you're the commanding general of NATO, and you say, you know what, this is a bluff, but the first proposal is not acceptable, let's see if we can get a better second proposal. Do you tonight say stronger airstrikes, hit him harder, nudge him further, or is that politically unacceptable, even though the military nudge might help you in the end?
Well, I mean, this is really a political decision, not a military decision. If I were the NATO commander, I'd be saying, keep the military pressure on, because this is a sign that it's having an impact. So tighten it up, shorten the amount of time he can gain for delay by putting increased pressure on his forces. If he thinks he can hold out for months, maybe more pressure lets him understand he's not going to make it for months. And so you accelerate this, and you have fewer innocent lives lost.
And yet, David, to the point you were making earlier, if you accelerate this right now, if you can get the support to accelerate this right now, you may fray your coalition, and then not only the President of the United States, but his other allies in this, the major allies in this, might have a bit of a problem on their hands.
Well, Wes Clark's right. I think that we ought to keep the military pressure on. I hope we don't let it up. I'm not sure whether you'd increase it or not. I think you might have some real trouble with that. But it's also true that this might be a time to really begin to investigate, okay, if Gaddafi's going to step down, how long before he steps down? How long would his son Saif stay in power? How many seats in a coalition government will the other side have? It's a lot depends on whether you can trust Saif in part here. You know, he's made a lot of inroads in the West, but he spoke to a lot of people in the West over the last 2 or 3 years, trying to convince people that he was a modernizer, he was very Western, wanted to change the face of Libya. I was one of those. He spent 3 hours with me. But when he became the butcher alongside his father, you had to believe, wait a minute, what was that all about wanting to Westernize it? I mean, the guy seems to be like his father. So I think some of the elements here in anything like this are, I think Wes is right. Gaddafi is going to go. The question is who's going to succeed, and could you live with a brief transition in the hands of the son? And how many guarantees do you have on that?
We'll take a quick break on that point. If you're just joining us tonight.